We begin with earnings, and Jason, why don't we start with New York Times? We've been telling the same story about newspapers for a while now. You know, money is heading in the opposite direction. Paper is the way of the past. Print is dead. But New York Times showing a little spark of life this quarter.
You're going to have some big print fans, some pro-print people that are going to say, how dare you, Mark Reith? Print isn't dead.
Radio@fool.com. Send them my way. Send them via email because print is dead.
Definitely facing some challenges there. We had talked about this, I guess, a little bit a couple of weeks ago in regard to the big Gannett acquisition recently. You start looking at the bigger question today is what's worth more, the information that you're getting or the brand that's giving it to you. And I think for the longest time, the brand was very important because it sort of signified a reputation and it earned trust. I think as time goes on, you sort of see a lot of these brands sort of maybe skew to one political side of the spectrum or the other, and so then you have your sort of
you pick and choose your sides.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I think that's fine. There's no big deal with that. But I think that generally speaking, what the internet has done has disrupted virtually everything that we do in our lives. Newspapers, indeed, fall in this category. I think when you look at the New York Times, I mean, the good news for them that they've made this pivot away from print and towards digital media subscriptions, and circulation is growing in that regard. So that's a positive. I think the bad news is though that the company, there are a number of bad points. There's some challenges they have to deal with. Is they're dependent on advertising as part of their revenue generation.
Yeah,
and advertising is. It's dwindling. It's becoming less and less a piece of the pie, which isn't good. I mean, we look at this quarter, advertising was 37% of total revenue. Mm-hmm. A year ago, it was 39%. The year before that, it was 41%. So they're becoming more and more dependent on paying subscribers. And that's fine if you can grow paying subscribers, and they are growing their paying subscribers. But when you look at the actual subscription revenue, the subscription revenue is growing far more slowly than the actual subscribers, which would indicate a lack of pricing power. And now that's not surprising. We don't have to really make a leap to get there. But then you have to start asking yourself, I mean, from an investor's perspective, is this something that is really worth, investing your capital in? And I mean, I see enough challenges here to where, I think really the best opportunity for anybody in this space is going to be consolidation, and I think we're watching that shakeout now, and I think that the New York Times is going to have to be a part of some type of consolidation in order to make it a more attractive story for investors. Because as it stands today, I just don't really see enough there to make investors excited about the years to come.
Yeah, they're clearly trying to make investors excited.
Yeah.
They've got some big promises, and one of them, I pulled this from their earnings, so they generated $400 million in revenue through online advertising and subscriptions in 2014. They want to double that to $800 million by 2020.
Well, I want a toilet made of gold, Mark, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen.
When you've got other companies like Facebook, for Pete's sake, is struggling with online advertising right now. It is, I think you said this earlier, it is a large pie, but it's getting divided up very quickly between some large companies out there. New York Times is going to be fighting for the same ad revenue that Facebook with their news feed now. They're trying to become the New York Times of the internet, and New York Times is going to have to fight them on that. On Facebook's home turf. I don't see $400 million turning into $800 million in 6 years. I don't see it happening in 20 years for New York Times.
I tend to agree with you there. I think that this landscape only becomes more and more competitive, and when you have platforms out there like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and maybe even LinkedIn to a lesser degree. Competing for all of those digital eyeballs. Yeah, I mean, for the New York Times to be able to grow advertising revenue at that kind of a rate seems like a stretch. I think it's going to boil down to consolidation in the industry. I think there are going to be more partnerships reached with a lot of those major platforms in order to potentially offer some revenue sharing there that could be beneficial for them down the road. But it's just a far different space than it was even 10 years ago.
Right.
And unfortunately, the New York Times was built in a different time on a different premise, right? It's not as nimble or as savvy as a lot of these new age media companies are, and I think that's where a lot of its challenges are gonna be for a while.
Real quick, let's speculate wildly. Who buys the New York Times? What conglomerate does the New York Times become a part of? We saw, a lot of media companies, like you said, are combining forces these days. I think Comcast just bought DreamWorks the other day, right? So
Yes.
is it so far afield to say that one day the New York Times and I don't know. Let's throw some other. Warren Buffett owns a whole bunch of newspapers out there as well. Is it so crazy to say Warren Buffett gobbles up the New York Times someday? Again, speculating wildly. What are your thoughts?
Yeah,
on the
I don't
future?
think that's necessarily as crazy. I don't think that's probably as big of a leap. I think Buffett's he likes newspapers a lot, and I think he really likes going down to the local level. I think when you look at it from a national level, that's probably where more competition is. But really, that local level, that's where I think probably those local tabloids have a little bit of a better advantage because they're really the only ones covering that space. And I mean, that's a really good question. Like, I mean, Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post for himself. I mean, it's not an Amazon-owned business.
Right.
But it is a Bezos-owned business, and it's becoming more and more a part of Amazon's model. So, I mean, I don't think it would be all that far-fetched to see a digital property consider bringing something like the New York Times under its wing in order to bring some more national media savvy. Possibly, I mean, I don't know. I mean, let's speculate wildly.
Speculate
perhaps
wildly.
Google. I mean, perhaps Facebook. I mean, I don't know that I necessarily see that happening, but if it wouldn't shock me if it did.
Yeah, absolutely.